Our staff at Green Card Voices are mourning the loss of George Floyd and are outraged by the ruthless conduct of Minneapolis police that resulted in Floyd's death. As an organization grounded in the work of advocating for groups who face and will continue to face adversity both interpersonal and structural, we condemn the anti-Black violence that Floyd's uniformed killer perpetuates. Green Card Voices demands swift and deliberate punishment be ruled against Floyd's killer and accomplices, and for extensive measures taken to begin addressing the trauma inflicted on Floyd's family and community. George Floyd should be alive right now.
Hi, my name is Cayden, and I was born in Thailand.
Nepal.
In northeastern of China.
Hi everyone, my name is Tree, or Tree if you're a Vietnamese speaking person, and I was born in Vietnam. I'm going to be your guest host in this special series. Over the years, Green Card Voices has had the honor of amplifying the voices of many Asian immigrants as they share their stories of coming to America. We are tremendously thankful for their outstanding contributions and long-standing friendship. We stand with you, today and every day.
Cayden Mak, Executive Director at 18 Million Rising, is a movement technologist interested in building trust, community, and independent power on the internet. As part of 18mr.org's founding staff, he was an integral part of developing the organization's vision, voice, analysis, and playbook. In his previous role as Chief Technology Officer, he was the driving force behind community-centered design for civic tech project VoterVox, a matching tool to help find personalized volunteer translation assistance for limited English proficient Asian American voters. Cayden was born in Southfield, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit. His dad was an immigrant from China who came to the U.S. to pursue higher education, and his mom is a white third-generation Detroiter from a working-class family. Cayden would describe himself as a biracial Chinese American, who feels it's important to talk about both the white side of his family and tell the Chinese side's immigration story and how they came together. C.M. Samala is an early-stage investor, successful social entrepreneur, and founding ED at 18 Million Rising. Samala regularly shares her skilled and inventive perspective in a variety of roles, of which include being a board director at Women's Foundation California, as a featured speaker at Obama's White House LGBTQ Tech and Innovation Summit, as a World Food Program Innovation Accelerator advisor, as a former senior advisor for social innovation at Mozilla, and as a contributor to Aspen Institute's Latinos and Society program. During the pandemic, Samala is doing a whole lot of gardening, cooking, baking, biking, and DJing, even more than she's usually up to. She's looking forward to camping and backpacking again when it's safe for her to do so. Samala was born in Broward County in Florida, but only remembers New York, where she was raised. Culturally and ethnically, she identifies as being Filipina and American and Filipina American. For her, Asian American is more of a political identity.
Hi everyone, this is Tree, and we are here for our final installment of what seems to be the first season of the hashtag Love Your Asian Neighbors podcast series, where we meet with guests who identify as Asian in one way or another throughout the U.S. And we get to check in with them. How are they doing during this very troubling era that we're in, as well as what work they do, what they're doing to both address these issues and what they're doing to care for themselves. And so today we have two guests who are both involved with the organization 18 Million Rising. And, you should just check out their website, check out the work that they do. Their work speaks for itself. Getting into it looks like me sharing the core questions that come with the podcast series. These core questions are based on our Story Stitch game, the Green Card Voices Story Stitch card game. And the first four questions include introducing yourself. What is your name? What are your preferred gender pronouns? The second question is, where do you consider home, whether that's geographically, spiritually, artistically, and so forth? What languages do you speak? What do you aspire to speak? Or languages that you once spoke, learn to speak more actively? And then the last question is, share something that you value and appreciate about yourself, which is the ninth question in the positive section of our Story Stitch game. And so we'll have Samala start. So Samala, if you'd like to take on these questions.
So my name is Samala. I'm based in the Bay, but my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm someone who feels very fortunate in that there are lots of places I consider home. Very literally, the Castro in San Francisco in the Bay Area is home and has been on paper for over a decade. Before that, Philly was my home. Growing up, New York was my home. And I definitely consider the Philippines a home, my homeland, where a lot of my heart is and family still is. Creatively, turntables are my home. I DJ. I've actually been DJing more during COVID, more frequently than I had been prior to that. Oh, the internet. The internet is definitely my home. It's like one of my favorite homes when it's not scary. I see Cayden giggling. I'm sorry, you all can't see that giggle if you're just listening to this. Languages I speak: English. I'm speaking it now. I am proficient with Tagalog. I could carry a conversation in Tagalog. I don't know that I would be able to give like a lecture on anything in Tagalog, but I could get around. I feel similarly about my Spanish. Like I could do all right. I'm not like doing any business deals in Spanish, but I could get around. I could meet a new friend and probably retain them with my level of Spanish currently. Growing up, I also spoke Ilocano, and I wish I had kept it up. I actually am trying to reacquaint myself to my mom's side of the family's language. I myself am a mom as of last June, and I would love for my little dude to at least know some Ilocano words. That would mean a lot to me. I still understand a good bit of it, but it's very different to understand a language than like the ability to express oneself in that language. Something I value and appreciate about myself. I by and large try to see the good in people, the light in people. I'm definitely in the give people the benefit of the doubt camp, and something that's kind of a new dimension to that quality of myself that I appreciate is through some hard lessons learned in the past year and change. I feel like I've gotten to grow and learn what it means to be optimistic about who people are and to want to see the light in them, but also for my own health and safety, understand when that optimism is exceeding what I'm getting and how to have healthy boundaries around that.
I'm Cayden. My pronouns are he, him, or they, them. I live in Oakland, California, just east of Lake Merritt for the folks who know. And I have been in this particular location as like home base for, I'd say like 7 years now. It's definitely like become home in a very like intense way. This is actually like the longest I've lived anywhere in my adult life. And my people are here. So that's home. I grew up in the Midwest, and I have very strong, like, I'm a Midwest Asian, and Michigan will always be home. I miss it terribly a lot of the time, actually, but I'm really glad that I live here. Similarly to Samala, I also am extremely online, and the internet is definitely one of my homes. And it's like been, even before the pandemic has been like a big lifeline for me, and the place where I've been able to find my people when it was hard to find people in my geographic vicinity. I speak English. My father passed away in January, and he was fluent in Cantonese and Mandarin, and Cantonese is like the family colloquial language. He learned Mandarin for business. There's now this whole big swath of family that I have who I don't have like a translator for, and who, some of them speak some English and some of them speak no English, but it's like on the spectrum of like, we can talk about everyday basic stuff to we can't talk at all. And so I feel some motivation to actually like learn. He never really tried to teach my sister and I when we were kids. And that was sort of like always a, like kind of like passive regret, but now that he's gone, it's like more, I don't know, it seems more important. And also I had to be fluent in a foreign language to graduate from high school. And there was a period of time where I was fluent in French, and I'm sure I could figure it out if you like drop me down into like a francophone country, I could probably figure it out, but I have not actively spoken French in a really long time. And then something that I value and appreciate about myself is, and this is something that I'm like beginning to discover in like a lot of like new dimensions as like in my 30s, is that I have like a really high degree of mental toughness that I think like growing up, I always sort of thought that I was not very tough because I was always sort of like small and nerdy. But the reality of the situation is that I'm very resilient and the kind of person who like can take the hits and then keep getting up. And it's become really important to me, both in work and also in like my personal life. And one of the surprising places I've discovered it is actually about 2 years ago, I discovered that I love weightlifting sports. And you have to be really mentally tough to keep getting better at a sport like that, where it's just you competing against yourself. Yeah, that discovery was sort of amazing because I was never an athletic person or never thought of myself as an athletic person. But one of the things that I really have appreciated about it is discovering that mental toughness.
Thanks so much, Cayden. It's great to know you a little bit better now with these intros, and we'll get to know both of you more. And the first question that I want to ask you both is part of our Story Stitch game. It's the first question, our COVID list, and it's describe the many ways your personal life, which can include but does not center your work life, has changed in recent weeks. So, Cayden, if you'd like to start this time.
Sure. I mean, I feel like my life has changed in innumerable ways. Some of them are good, actually. I have 2 roommates. They're both great. And the 3 of us have started spending a lot more time together. So I've been like cooking big dinners on Sunday nights. And so we've been having like Sunday dinner together. And we will have like board game nights every couple weeks. All of us are pretty busy because all of us are still working to some extent. But having some time to like spend some quality time with actual humans in meat space is like really, really helpful. And so that's been a big one. One thing that's been really challenging though is, so my mom still lives in Michigan. And it's been really hard she lives by herself. She's older, she's immunocompromised. And it's been really stressful to try and help her manage what's going on with her and like getting her needs met when like it's hard to get people to come over. It's hard to she doesn't like walk very well, so it's hard for her to get groceries. So like helping her navigate that has been kind of a burden. And then work-wise, I think one of the things that has really changed is as the executive director of a nonprofit that organizes Asian Americans and has folks who are in multiple different states and time zones, I feel a lot of pressure to make sure that they are supported. And I think that like the aspect of my job that is about kind of emotional labor and interpersonal stuff has increased significantly. And it's something that I think everybody who leads an organization, whether that's a business or a nonprofit or a church, is like trying to figure out right now. It's like, how do you get your people's needs met in a world that is radically different than the one that we were in like 2.5 months ago?
I'm having a lot of time with my 10-month-old, and of course very biased, but I think they're a really great tiny human. And if I were working in a more conventional, traditional, or pre-COVID sense and rhythm of that, I would conceivably be out of the house for several hours a day, and instead here. So even when I'm working in a different room, I could take a little break if I don't have calls, or if I just have 10 minutes that I could spare, or if I just miss him, I could go to the other room and say what's up to him. And that's been lovely. On the how my personal life has changed in a way that isn't quite so lovely and tender and awesome. I am deeply extroverted and very social as a person. And as much as I'm loving this time with my family, this time with my wife, time with a little human, I also have a very cute dog and a cat. I live in like our best queer lady lives with all our mammals. I miss hugging people that I don't live with and being in group settings that aren't virtual. I do not think that's something I will get used to, and I don't know that I want to. I've experienced virtual, like deeply virtual rendered meetings, and I don't know that they should ever replace, or the intention or hope should ever be to replace in-person physical human contact. Back to a more positive change has been all the home cooked meals. My wife and I both love cooking. It's something that bonded us early on, even when we were just friends. And when we're really busy, it's super easy to kind of cave to the desire to get takeout or go out to eat, which are lovely things. And I really look forward to doing them again. And also having our life logistics and our weekly planning also include meal planning and visiting farmers markets, that being a cadence rather than a nice to have. Whereas when we were both super busy and not home quite as much as we are now, going to the farmers market was an event, and now it's a necessity. And I actually would like to keep that moving forward. I think that's been a happy evolution of how we interact with our food supply chain. It's just buy it from the farmers because we can, especially in a place like California where lovely produce is readily available.
Yes, thank you both for sharing both the ups and downs of these past few weeks and how it's affecting, things that maybe taken for granted or opens up new ways of living. So moving on to our next question, which is a guest-specific question. We wanted to ask, how has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted your relationships with technology, and how has it changed or not changed how you agitate and mobilize communities through digital advocacy tactics? Samala, if you'd like to go first, that'd be great.
If I'm being very honest, I don't know that much has changed about my relationship to technology. I think what's changed is that other people are relating to it in a way that I have had for a long time, mostly as a function of work, actually. I've been doing very, if not exclusively, digital in nature work for most of my career. I have had to organize environmental movements from across several time zones, pre-18MR. When I started 18MR, we were a fully distributed team. Cayden was still in upstate New York. I was working with someone in Southern California. We were all over the place. And so, our weeklies were virtual. We had to figure out how to plan a campaign totally virtually with various tools. So I actually felt somewhat as prepared I was going to be for that very particular slice of our existence right now. The part where it's a lot of faces on screens, Slack channels, whatever chat, the phenomenon of managing 12 types of communications across 3 different apps in no less than 20 something windows. It was oddly familiar to me. The fact that everyone was put in a position where they had to operate in that similar way was initially nice. And that because I was like, oh, we all are operating this way. And my fluency is very helpful in this respect. And then we hit this threshold where I felt myself getting deeply frustrated because I had been operating for a certain way for so long that people who were shoved into this existence weren't comfortable. There were a lot of instances where there weren't norms set for how to interact online. You have to create a lot more space for people to exist, I think. And there's a real skill and empathy required to do that, especially on Zooms it's mostly Zoom. When someone starts dominating all the airtime, it gets really messy and challenging of how how to adjust that. And I've found myself being both called upon in a way that was lovely, but also didn't always come with consent of just like, oh, Samala knows how to do this, like she should just do it. And like the default to me being like the anchor, the facilitator, and the expectation that I would always step in. I want to be of service, and sometimes like of all the things that I'm trying to do on any given hour, any given day, I don't necessarily feel that generosity is possible for me.
I like really identify with that. Like at first it was like, welcome to my world. And then it was like, wow, there's too many of you here. I really think that like the first 2 weeks I had like a really intense social calendar. And then the third week I was like, oh no, I cannot look at screen anymore. And that's kind of where I'm at. It's interesting because I often talk about how I feel like the internet saved my life when I was a teenager. It was like a real like place that I was able to go and I really felt like I didn't fit in where I grew up. And like it's always been a place where I think community can exist in sometimes like much more authentic forms than offline because of the way that you can opt in. But I think that like for the first time in my life, I've kind of had it. I found my limit, and it makes me feel like a cranky old person to say, but like I'm a little done, and it's weird to feel that tired of something that you love so much. But I think that that's also like part of the like fatigue of the world that we're in right now. It's like a hard place to be. I used to say I built a team that's pandemic proof, but I don't actually think that's true because like we've had to deal with a lot of the like interpersonal psychological challenges of doing work during a like massive global public health crisis. But we have built a pandemic resilient organization because of a lot of things that Samala is talking about, where like our team is still distributed. We have I'm in the Bay, we have staff in Los Angeles and Durham, North Carolina, and DC. So we're used to these like patterns and rhythms of working remotely and like what it takes to build like deep team cohesion in spite of being distributed all over the place. And I'm really thankful for that. Like we didn't have to figure that one out. It like let us focus on like more advanced challenges around the sort of like emotional human needs of people. And in terms of like the tools that we use to do our work more publicly, it's like we've been building community and doing political education and mobilizing people for collective action online for 7.5 years. And even outside of the Asian American community, we're often recognized as some of the people who are doing the most interesting, nuanced work with the internet. And I think that like that's another way that we have inadvertently built a pandemic resistant organization, that like a lot of our core program has not changed. You know, like the content focus has changed because of the like spike in anti-Asian racism and the really like troubling things that are starting to happen on the campaign trail for the 2020 election, and the need for like robust mutual aid in places where our like public support system is failing. All those things are things that like we're like weirdly well equipped to do. And so one thing that's been a little bit dissonant about it for me as like somebody who leads an organization is this feeling that this is a moment that we're like uniquely well equipped to rise to meet, even while I'm like experiencing all of this like sadness about like not hugging my friends and grief about like the plans that I had for this spring and this summer that just cannot happen because I can't get on an airplane. And you know, both of those things are true. It's like it's a very strange time to live in, and I found that like giving myself the space to feel both those feelings is hard and necessary.
Hi folks, it's Asha, the new podcast manager at Green Card Voices. I can't believe we're wrapping up the first season of #LoveYourAsianNeighbors. But don't worry, there's more content. We've got our Patreon Stitch Picks, the exclusive extended guest recordings available only for our podcast Patreon subscribers. With the podcast guests you've heard from tonight, Cayden talks gratitude and the beauty of chosen families. When you can surround yourself with a diverse group of co-conspirators who challenge you, who help you become more authentically yourself, you can learn more from your people than institutions. Why? As Cayden describes, there is a knowing grounded in the body and in being a human being that your chosen family can share with you. As many folks cross the 2-month mark of stay-at-home orders in the U.S., Cayden and Samala ask, how will the pandemic affect the way we develop relationships? Like many questions right now, it might feel too early to tell. Our guests focus on uncertainty around maintaining long-distance and nascent friendships if this reality continues for multiple years, and how we can best support our families and continue to create space for one another even as we face new restrictions. Cayden asks listeners to imagine the safety they would like to cultivate in their lives. In the face of increased xenophobia during this pandemic, building resilient networks of co-conspirators can help us share fears while drawing strength from one another. The long-term answer lies in community. Hear from Samala on grief and identity and what it means to become better versions of ourselves, especially in this current public health crisis. She pulls on her experience as a lacrosse player entering UPenn with a devastating ACL injury. Samala explains how grief can turn into the gift of learning to be more. And here's a fun one. The day before San Francisco declared a state of emergency, Samala bought plane tickets for a work trip to India. When she found herself in the Mumbai airport after India had closed its borders, and as the Bay Area was on the cusp of its shelter in place, she experienced both great fear and immense happiness. Learn how the story played out in this stitch pick, and maybe help us track down the Good Samaritan who got Samala home. All that and more in our 5th edition of the Patreon Stitch Pick series. Head on over to Patreon and take a listen, and tell us in the comments how the themes that Cayden and Samala share with us take shape in your life. Use the web link bit.ly/4ourGCVneighbors. That's bit.ly/4ourGCVneighbors to get started. Thanks for listening. See you around, neighbors.
Tell about something you feel is a great injustice. So, Cayden, would you like to take this one?
I think that like one of the things that we're seeing in this moment is the ways that like there are so many like intense injustices that are built into the way that we've been living for a while. And one of the things that I've really actually been excited about with regards to one of those great injustices is the way that gig economy workers are organizing themselves. So we're talking about people who are driving for Instacart or Uber Eats, or the folks who are like giving you your rideshare rides, and also like warehouse workers who work for companies like Amazon. A lot of those folks are really like their work is super undervalued, even though it's like literally the work that we rely on for almost all of our other work, whether that's ordering supplies for your office or getting groceries for your family. That's such a like critical and before this a very invisible thing, right? Like it was something that like happened, and in some ways the technology is designed to make those people invisible. And I don't know what the numbers are, but those people are often people of color. They're working class people, they're people of color. And I think it's a great injustice that those companies have been trying to, these big tech companies that make, billions of dollars, have been trying to evade their responsibility to those workers. I think that like one of the things that really is, I guess, like a positive outcome here, though, is that more people are aware of the human beings who do that work. That there's still people who run the economy and are like necessary. And there are people who are like, you know, they're not heroes. They're trying to survive just like everybody else. And the people that they work for owe them a fair wage. They owe them safety on the job. And this crisis is really pointing up the ways that a lot of companies are failing in that regard. And I think that's, you know, it's an issue that I think cuts across race in a lot of ways, because the folks who work there are like working class people from like basically every racial demographic that are being treated as disposable. And I think that's like kind of a like sad truth of our economy that has like existed for a while. It's just been intensified by coronavirus.
I thought about this question in particular, and I had very similar thoughts that I wanted to share. But Cayden shared a lot of them, so I'm gonna like talk about the nerdier part that I didn't like think about too much, but came to mind because of what Cayden said and what I feel inspired to share now, as opposed to what I thought I was going to, which now feels redundant. And it is around like the injustices and how we set up our economies, and very specifically how we use debt as an instrument, as a financial instrument. And apologies, I'm going to get real nerdy real fast. I feel like the most glaring example I could think of off the top of my head is Haiti. If folks don't know about the history of Haiti, I highly recommend Googling it. Better yet, just like go straight to the Wikipedia page. But Haiti, in the process of successfully overthrowing France, a nation of recently freed slaves, as soon as they established their own nation and freed themselves, at least physically, from France, France immediately sent them a literal bill that I think is like in current dollars worth probably close to $20 billion. Don't quote me on that, but I don't think I'm that far off. Immediately put Haiti into debt. And that debt was validated because the United States, I'm almost positive, specifically Citibank, agreed to that bill and made Haiti responsible for paying its debt to France for freeing themselves. And so, you know, I feel like it got really in vogue in the late 90s to make comments, to use Haiti as like an example of a very poor country. Be like, Haiti's so poor. Like, I'm like butchering this, is going to sound problematic. I don't mean for it to. But I like have this memory of when everyone wanted to talk about like helping a poor country, like when there was an economic development project, they used Haiti as like a fucked up pedestal for what that looks like, without ever talking about why that was the case. And it's because of a deep economic injustice that meant that France got to send them a bill, and other countries agreed that they had to pay it and force them to pay it and put them on the hook for that. This was in the 1800s. So the stuff that Cayden is talking about in terms of how we treat gig workers, are ideas about who does labor and what labor gets valued, is definitely being brought to light in a way that is very hard to ignore, and we shouldn't ignore it. And I would love for this moment to be an opportunity to like transform and transcend the deeply problematic ways in which we've related to the value of work and who does that work. Yeah, and there is a very thick but worthy read, in my humble, nerdy opinion, Debt, the First 5,000 Years. David Graeber is the author. And it's less about debt as like a it's about debt as like a financial concept, but more from an anthropological view, which I think is a very helpful one, and one that actually it's a perspective that I don't see a lot in mainstream kind of intellectual culture. So yeah, if you don't know what Cayden and I are talking about, or you know a little bit and want to know more, you have 2 action items, 2 invitations.
I like that we're just like, oh, here's a syllabus about debt. Great, cool.
But are you surprised, Cayden?
Nope, not surprised at all.
Thank you both. I want you both to feel totally encouraged to go just blast this podcast with all your nerdisms. Anything we are trying to, uplift people into knowing about things that are worth knowing about, especially around labor exploitation, especially around race and all these complex and sensitive things. So, well, to set up, one of the 18 Million Rising's operating principles is co-conspirators instead of allies. We have 3 questions, starting with, what does it mean to be a co-conspirator at this moment? The second one is, what are the least articulated challenges and goals your members, co-conspirators, and collaborators are struggling with in this moment? And then how can people become effective co-conspirators, whether they're already a part of MR's base or not? So feel free to both unmute yourselves and chat or alternate.
Yeah, I think the co-conspiratorship operating principle is one that is, it really, I think it emerged out of the sort of like Black Lives Matter moment. And I think there are ways in which I think co-conspirator to me speaks less to this sort of like voluntarily giving up things that are sort of creature comforts in the name of justice, but rather like, how are we going to throw down like as hard as possible, and really like get uncomfortable with the fact that like systems of privilege and oppression in the world, like this country, but also in the world, treat people differently based on where they're born, what they look like, and what they have access to. And I think that like to be a co-conspirator is to be willing to like really put a lot on the line in the name of that, to like really take risks, because I think in order to bring about real change, you have to take big risks. The fact of the matter is that like there are like the structure, the fact that these things still exist and that they persist indicates that systems of power have some kind of investment in perpetuating them. And in order to confront power, we have to take risks. To just like say that we believe something is not necessarily a high enough risk to challenge power in that way. And I think that like right now is a particularly challenging time, because simultaneously people are dealing with the like anxiety and fear and grief of the pandemic, and the sort of like there's like a health level, individual and family health level, that's, you know, it's frightening to go outside. It's challenging to go outside. There's also this level of like an increased visibility for Asian Americans that has like come with a lot of very intentional flame stoking, like racist flame stoking on the part of a lot of our elected officials to say that, you know, this is China's fault. And that's not a new phenomenon. You know, I was a couple weeks ago on a call with the journalist and activist Helen Zia, who was part of the big wave of Asian American organizing that happened in the 80s after the murder of Vincent Chin. And she pointed out that in a lot of ways, this is really similar. Like this is a time when, like that was a time when the Japanese auto industry was kind of being blamed for the downturn in American manufacturing. The increase in Asian immigration was something that people were actually starting to notice after the repeal of the Immigration Naturalization Act. And, it's like a classic, like, immigrants are coming for your jobs situation, both from within and without. And like those kinds of tensions, along with a downturn in the economy, led to this like horrific act of violence. Similarly, we're in this moment where like the message from Washington, from the White House, is this is China's fault. People are propagating these conspiracy theories that this is somehow something that China wanted. And I think, it shouldn't come as any surprise that in a moment when something that is not really comprehensible is happening, that is very scary, that like people are looking for somebody to blame, people are looking for an outlet. It doesn't excuse the behavior, obviously, because like nobody asked for this, right? But that like this is an old play in that playbook. And then on an even deeper level, it's like working class Asian Americans are like bearing the brunt of a lot of like job loss, business closure, stuff like that. And at the same time, so are a lot of like Black and Latinx small businesses. We're also seeing ways in which like access to care is definitely divided along racial lines, where like it's not an accident that like more Black people are dying of COVID, right? Like the historical inequities in access to like wealth and healthcare have a lot to do with that. It's not an accident that more people are dying on reservations, like in the Navajo Nation, because of historical lack of access to wealth and healthcare and stuff like that. In this moment, we have to be holding all of these things. That's hard, right? Like that's not an easy thing to do. And I think it points to like how complex the problems that we're facing actually are, right? Like everybody is impacted, but in a different way. And acknowledging that like the severity of those different impacts might be different should not have to diminish the like stuff that we're struggling with, either as individuals or community. But I think to be a co-conspirator in this moment is really to think about those inequities and think about like, what are the ways that I can potentially mobilize resources to help people who are like maybe geographically close to me, but are worlds away in terms of access.
I mean, I think that's one of the beautiful things about the co-conspirator framing, which I very strongly, if not exclusively, attribute to Cayden. The invitation to be a co-conspirator rather than to be an ally. It feels more active, and it feels like something that you step into but can't step out of. Was one of the challenges that I sometimes felt with the concept of allyship, is that too often it was a noun and not a verb. And sure, co-conspirator is a noun, but it's not something like you can't start to conspire with someone and then pull away. You could, but that will kind of diminish the impact that probably you wanted to have and why you stepped into like a co-conspirator role in the first place. It's like the difference between sympathizing and empathizing, allyship or co-conspiracy. Like you see someone suffering and you have sympathy for them and you want to help, and it's like that's the relationship, versus empathizing with that person, drawing upon experiences where there's something shared and feeling for them in a way that is deeper, and that makes it harder to not have sustained desire to participate. And I think, Cayden, what you were just talking about, the ways in which we could all share in our struggles, like the thing that came to mind as you were speaking was like mutual aid. And I think that that's something that we should lift up even more, because you put more of yourself on the line as a co-conspirator, or that's the invitation, right? Is to engage more deeply, more sustained, like put yourself in this mix with other people. But you also gain so much. And I think when you actually care about another human enough to be willing to sacrifice your safety, to be willing to sacrifice your reputation, or whatever it is that you think you might lose, what you gain is so much more than that. And it's because you're not gaining something that's for yourself. It's actually like a shared win.
Totally. Well, I think the thing that like I'm hearing you sort of like move towards is this idea that like all of those things that I named of like public health outcomes, anti-Asian racism, the like collapse of the economy, the impacts of those things, like they're not happening in a vacuum, right? Like the systems that like helped those things come into existence are acting on all of us, right? And to me, co-conspiratorship on a really deep level is like about understanding that the stuff that has set our community up to fail is the same as the stuff that has set the Black community up to fail. The impacts are different because we are different communities. So there are like different material inputs and outcomes, but that there are economic, there are social, there are political systems that have like a vested interest in us behaving in certain ways, and generally in certain ways that see each other as competitors for the same set of resources, the same slice of the power pie, but that like the reality of the situation is the sum is greater than the whole of its part, or the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. I always get that mixed up. And working together and working collaboratively and seeing each other through our pain for like the humans that we all are is like actually where that's how we win, right? Like we need each other to win. And like the way that you do that is starting with trust, right? Like there's a lot of reasons that Black and Asian, Indigenous and Asian communities don't trust each other. A lot of deep historical reasons that come from out of real hurt. But then I think like a start is to articulate this politic of co-conspiratorship that is like, we do have a lot of shared struggle. We do have a lot of, or the same systems that are messing with your family are messing with my family. And seeing that and like acting on that in a way that like is not just like, oh, I'm more privileged because I'm lighter skinned and therefore like I can like give you something, is like, so it's transactional and it's bullshit. Like, but the thing that I think co-conspiratorship asks us to do is like identify those like systemic things and understand how like the stuff that hurts and the places that are tender in our own lives are like also impacting others in a variety of ways, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think the way that the first stimulus bill panned out really shows where those shared struggles are in a way that is horrific, but I think can be helpful if we choose to see it that way. And by that, I mean, look at who was given like history-breaking tax relief, who was essentially given massive lump sums of financial resources, and who was left to compete for them. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, and like it's so glaring now that I don't know that there's anything other than to be co-conspirators in changing a lot of this shit. Like what is the alternative at this point? Like things could not be clearer, things could not be more in the light. If you're paying attention to the right things, which I have to admit is hard. Like like just to be real, like I'm a fucking 10-month-old, y'all. Like I'm not sleeping. He's teething. my attention and energy is scant. So I'm not consuming a ton of information, but from what I am able to see and notice, how could you not look at how we still have outrageous state-sanctioned violence, how we have a lack of justice in our criminal systems, how we still want to figure out how to build like private prisons in some states while we're figuring out how to keep kids educated or keep people safe in their own homes or keep people alive in hospitals. Like, you gotta be kidding me. The just egregious lack of prioritization of resources and lives. Yeah, we can't really do that anymore. And so if there's something better than being co-conspirators in that, I don't know what it is.
To relate that to this question about challenges and goals, I think that like coming from like art, like my perspective as working on like mass mobilization, but also trying to play this like narrative long game, where we're trying to like remake what people think is possible in the world. I think there are a lot of big challenges around reframing the failure of something like the stimulus bill into this like urgent need for a real solidarity economy where we're actually taking care of each other. And that the government feel and our like elected representatives feel like a real sense of obligation to like truly care for humans. Because like, yeah, similarly, like I don't know how you could make it more plain who is being cared for or what is being cared for than the kind of like tax relief that's going to large corporations while, you know, small like family-owned businesses struggle for the scraps. The challenge of articulating this vision of like what we want the world to look like feels harder right now than it's ever felt to me. And that's probably because everything feels so dire, right? Like the fact that there are actively human beings like fighting for their lives in hospitals on ventilators is like hard to square with trying to do that kind of narrative work. But I also think it's so important that we start articulating what an alternative world looks like, because without an alternative, what are we fighting for, right? Like we need a like truly hopeful vision, and it's like really hard to find that hope sometimes. You know, even as somebody who like professionally is engaged with the most hopeful people on the planet, probably, right? Like it can be really hard to find that energy.
With the just sheer lack of uncertainty and clarity of what's going to happen next is an unprecedented, immense, and who knows if it'll come again in our lifetimes, opportunity to do this reimagining, to recreate, to envision. I mean, everything, like literally everything. Yes, that is daunting, but also incredible and wonderful. And, you know, I think there is a lot of trauma that is happening and will continue to happen economically, you know, or physical health. Like I do worry that this is going to be deeply uncomfortable for a long time. And at the same time, I think of how much better could our world look, how much better could our societies look, how much better could our economies look when we don't have like hyper exploitive supply chains anymore. You know, like what are the human impacts? Ideally, like what are the healthy human impacts, the healthy environmental impacts, healthy economic impacts that could happen in some point in the hopefully not too distant future because of the complete disruption to our supply chains and to global travel.
Well, and I think like to think about this in terms of co-conspiratorship is also to understand that like like the opportunity that we have to like remake the world and the way that our society functions is so blue sky that like it invites co-conspiratorship, because like we know that what exists doesn't work. So the invitation is not just to invert who has power in this country and who does not, and who has power in this world and who does not, but it's actually to like radically rethink how power is distributed at all. And that like requires a like you know, a sort of like Grace-Lee Boggsian kind of like evolution in our understanding of our humanity and the humanity of the other people who exist in this world. Revolution and evolution, right? Like we need both of those things. And that's what this moment calls for. And that's what I think, you know, a lot of her writing is about, the way that a moment of crisis or like a punctuated moment in history calls for humans to sort of transcend the like their immediate surroundings and their immediate self-understandings to really become like a true next generation of humans, right? It's like making a world that works for everybody. I think that's like the ultimate that's like the ultimate co-conspiratorship.
Yeah, grief has definitely been top of mind, both for the, you know, the reasons of like loss of life and being someone who's from New York, I am only a degree of separation away from people who have passed. And it's like, I don't know that I am in a place where I've even processed that. It like doesn't directly affect me, but it does. It's like, I haven't lost any family, thank God. Please let that continue to be the case. But some of my dearest humans in the world have. And I have to say that of my close friends who unfortunately have like lost people, I have noticed that those who come from families where there's a strong like cultural relationship to like some spiritual practice or ethnic practice is like having the tools for grief is just beyond valuable and like is such a saving grace right now. And I think it's one of the things that when I'm not feeling optimistic and feeling like the possibility of this moment, when I'm more in my terror, America as a very gross generalization doesn't like grapple with death or grief well. Like it's such a taboo in this country that with it happening so much and it being so persistent, pervasive, like it kind of scares me what people are going to do because they are so out of touch with their relationship to grief and like don't acknowledge it. And I'm very deeply grateful that I, as a firstborn American with a lot of connection to my Filipino roots still, that I feel like I still have those tools. I hope for everyone to find those tools if it isn't in their family's culture already.
Is there a brief summary of how you think people can become effective co-conspirators that you haven't already said?
One of the hardest asks to make right now of people is to like stay with your empathy in a moment when like everything feels really emotionally overwhelming. But I think that like, I don't know, it's one of these like weird, like, when I'm about to say this, like everybody has this experience, but I think like low-key everybody does. Like, when you're super depressed and you're just like, I feel horrible, everything is bad, nobody knows how bad it is, nobody realizes how like unbearably bad the world is. And then like you talk to like that one friend, like maybe it's just a text conversation and you're like, no, wait, like the world sucks for everybody, right? Like this is like a shared human experience of like not feeling belonging and like not feeling purpose. That moment of kind of like just opening the door, even if it's to one person, to be like, oh yeah, like trying to understand where you fit in the world is this like profound human experience that like is amplified by all these other things. Opening yourself to that experience in this sort of more social way is actually like, it may keep you alive. Actually, there's a way in which that solidarity can be really selfish. And that's like, we need more human connection now than ever before. Knowing that connecting with people on that level is critical to your own mental health may actually be a key to like becoming a more effective co-conspirator through this crisis. It's not a contest, right? Like we're not trying to compete to say like my shit is worse than your shit, but to be like, no, like this is a profound human experience of like uncertainty, of like having our plans, even the most trivial of our plans, upended. And it makes sense to grieve for those things, but also like, how is my shit connected to your shit? And like, how can that maybe bring us closer together?
And so that's it, folks, for this series. Thank you for all your support, helping Green Card Voices be able to reach out and create space for our guests to speak on all the contributions they've made in their lives at scales both small, big, and ongoing. We hope to see you in future podcasts, hear from you from future podcasts. Right now, we're going to I'm going to invite our guests to explore some of the other questions we have in our Story Stitch card activity. This has been Tree, wishing you all a safe time out there as we move into the future.
The questions that guide this episode were drawn from Green Card Voices' Virtual Story Stitch activity. Virtual Story Stitch is a modified version of GCV's Story Stitch conversation card game.
Story Stitch was co-created with 70 community members as a way to build deep connections between immigrants and their neighbors by telling stories, opening minds, and encouraging people to get to know one another. In March of 2020, responding to the COVID-19, also named the coronavirus pandemic, we co-created it again and came up with a virtual version of the game to stay connected, share our stories, and feel less isolated during the time of social distancing. In addition to the 33 questions in Green Card Voice's Story Stitch deck, we have added 7 bonus questions pertaining to the COVID-19 pandemic. For more information, visit patreon.com, spelled Patreon/Virtual Story Stitch. If you're ready to have access to your own Virtual Story Stitch kit, join by becoming a patron on our Patreon today and give what you can. Your support funds the free services and resources we offer to our community. Thank you.